What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks onto a late-night talk show, only to find himself facing a host who seems determined to humiliate him on live television? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history when Hugh Jackman, the man we all know and love as Wolverine, found himself in an on-air battle that would leave audiences stunned and questioning everything they thought they knew about their favorite talk show host. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, telling me what you think really happened here, because trust me, this story has layers that will blow your mind. The night started like any other taping of Jimmy Kimmel Live. The studio audience was buzzing with excitement, knowing they were about to witness Hugh Jackman, one of the most charismatic and professional actors in Hollywood, promote his latest project. What they didn't expect was to become witnesses to a confrontation that would expose a side of their beloved host that few had ever seen before. Hugh walked onto the stage with his trademark smile, waving to the enthusiastic crowd who erupted in applause. He looked every bit the polished professional, dressed in a sharp navy suit, his demeanor relaxed and friendly as he approached Jimmy's desk. The two men shook hands, and for a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. Hugh settled into the guest chair, adjusting his jacket, and preparing for what he assumed would be the typical light-hearted banter that made these appearances so enjoyable. Jimmy, however, had something else in mind entirely. From the moment Hugh sat down, there was something different in Jimmy's eyes, a coldness that seemed completely at odds with his usual warm television persona. The audience couldn't see it yet, but Hugh certainly could, and it immediately put him on edge. The interview began innocuously enough, with Jimmy asking about Hugh's latest film project. Hugh launched into his usual enthusiastic explanation, his genuine passion for his craft shining through as he described the challenges of the role and his collaboration with the director. But as Hugh spoke, Jimmy's expression grew increasingly skeptical, his responses becoming shorter and more dismissive. Then came the first real sign that something was wrong. As Hugh was mid-sentence, describing a particularly emotional scene in his new movie, Jimmy suddenly cut him off with a wave of his hand. The gesture was so abrupt and dismissive that Hugh actually stopped talking, clearly taken aback by the interruption. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he said, "You know, Hugh, I have to ask you something that's been bothering me for a while now." The way he said it made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats, sensing that whatever was coming next wasn't going to be the usual playful ribbing they were accustomed to seeing on the show. Hugh, ever the professional, maintained his composure and nodded for Jimmy to continue, though his smile had become noticeably more strained. "Sure, Jimmy, what's on your mind?" Jimmy's response would set the tone for everything that followed. "I've been watching your career for years now, and I can't help but wonder, do you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again? I mean, let's be honest here, whether you're Wolverine or you're singing and dancing on Broadway, it's all just the same angry Australian guy with different costumes, isn't it?" The question hit Hugh like a physical blow. The audience could see. His jaw tightened slightly, though he fought to maintain his professional demeanor. This wasn't the typical gentle teasing that talk show hosts were known for. This was a direct attack on his artistic integrity and versatility as an actor. Hugh took a deep breath before responding, his voice steady but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Jimmy, I think that's a pretty unfair characterization of my work. I've spent decades developing my craft, working in theater, film, and television, across a wide range of genres and characters." But Jimmy wasn't backing down. If anything, Hugh's measured response seemed to embolden him further. "Oh, come on, Hugh, we're all friends here. You can admit it. The angry loner thing works for you, so you just keep doing it. There's nothing wrong with finding your niche and sticking to it." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Members of the audience were beginning to look at each other with confused expressions, clearly sensing that this wasn't the friendly celebrity interview they had expected to see. Some were starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats, while others leaned forward, not wanting to miss what was clearly becoming a very unusual television moment. Hugh's response showed the first real crack in his professional facade. "Jimmy, I have to say I'm a little surprised by this line of questioning. I came here tonight to talk about my new film, which represents months of intense preparation and collaboration with some incredibly talented people. If you want to have a serious discussion about acting and character development, I'm more than happy to do that, but this feels more like you're trying to provoke me than actually interview me." The words hung in the air for a moment, and for a brief second it seemed like Jimmy might recognize that he had crossed a line and pull back. Instead, he doubled down in a way that would shock everyone watching. Jimmy's expression hardened as Hugh's words clearly struck a nerve. Rather than acknowledging the validity of his guest's concern or steering the conversation back to safer territory, Jimmy seemed to take Hugh's measured pushback as a personal challenge. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice taking on a sharper edge that was completely at odds with his usual television persona. "Provoke you?" Jimmy repeated, his tone dripping with mock innocence. "Hugh, I'm just asking the questions that I think our audience really wants answers to. I mean, let's talk about your Broadway career for a minute. You've made quite a big deal about being this versatile performer, but isn't it convenient how you always seem to land these leading man roles? How you're always the hero, always the guy everyone's supposed to root for?" The implication was clear, and it hit Hugh in a way that was deeply personal. Anyone who knew anything about Hugh's career knew how hard he had worked to earn his place. In theater, how many years he had spent honing his craft in smaller productions before achieving the success he enjoyed today. Jimmy's words suggested that Hugh's success was somehow unearned or handed to him, which was not only insulting but demonstrably false. Hugh's voice remained controlled, but there was no hiding the anger that was beginning to build behind his eyes. "Jimmy, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, but I think you're being incredibly disrespectful, not just to me, but to the hundreds of people I've worked with over the years who can attest to the effort and dedication I bring to every project." The audience was now completely silent, the usual energy of a late-night talk show replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. Some audience members were looking toward the exits, as if considering whether they should leave, while others were pulling out their phones, realizing they might be witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Jimmy, however, seemed energized by the growing tension. He turned to the audience with a theatrical gesture, as if inviting them to join in on what he apparently considered to be good-natured fun. "Come on, everybody, we all know Hugh's a good sport. He can handle a little honest conversation, right, Hugh? I mean, you did spend how many years growling and flexing your muscles in those Wolverine movies? That's got to build up some thick skin." It was at this moment that Hugh made a decision that would define the rest of the interview. Instead of continuing to try to deflect or redirect the conversation, he decided to meet Jimmy's aggression head-on. His posture straightened, and when he spoke, his voice carried a strength and authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the studio. "You know what, Jimmy? You want to have an honest conversation? Let's have one. You're sitting there, taking shots at my career, my work, my integrity. But what exactly are you bringing to this conversation? You're hiding behind this desk, behind your writers, behind this whole setup where you get to ask the questions and I'm supposed to just sit here and take whatever you want to dish out." The words hit Jimmy like a slap. For the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely taken aback, as if he hadn't expected Hugh to fight back with such directness and force. The smirk that had been playing at his lips disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like uncertainty. But Hugh wasn't finished. Years of pent-up frustration with dismissive interviewers and people who tried to minimize his work seemed to pour out of him all at once. "You want to talk about playing the same character over and over? What about you, Jimmy? How long have you been sitting behind this desk, making the same jokes, asking the same shallow questions, hiding behind this persona that you think gives you the right to tear down people who actually put themselves out there and create something? The studio had gone completely silent. Even the production crew, who had seen their share of awkward interview moments over the years, seemed stunned by what they were witnessing. This wasn't just an uncomfortable interview anymore. This was a full-scale confrontation between two men who clearly had very different ideas about respect, professionalism, and what constituted entertainment. Jimmy's face had flushed red, and for a moment he seemed completely at a loss for words. When he finally did speak, his voice had lost all pretense of joviality. "Hugh, I think you need to calm down here. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I think are appropriate." Hugh stood up from his chair, his full height and presence suddenly dominating the small talk show set. "Your show? You think that gives you the right to be deliberately disrespectful to your guests? To try to humiliate people who come here in good faith to promote their work and connect with their fans?" The confrontation had reached a boiling point, and it was clear that something had to give. Jimmy, perhaps realizing that he had pushed too far, tried to regain control of the situation. "Hugh, maybe we should take a quick break and—" But Hugh cut him off, his voice carrying across the entire studio. "No, Jimmy, we're not taking a break. You started this, so let's finish it." The entire studio seemed to hold its breath as Hugh's words echoed through the space. Jimmy, clearly rattled by how completely the situation had spiraled out of his control, looked toward his producers off stage, as if hoping someone would step in and rescue him from the confrontation he had started. But the producers, recognizing that they were witnessing television gold, regardless of how uncomfortable it might be, made no move to intervene. Hugh remained standing, his presence commanding the entire studio as he continued to address Jimmy directly. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had an opportunity tonight to have a genuine conversation with your audience about art, about creativity, about the challenges and rewards of bringing stories to life. Instead, you chose to try to score cheap points by tearing someone down. That says a lot more about you than it does about me." Jimmy's attempt to regain his composure was painful to watch. He forced a laugh that sounded hollow and artificial in the tense atmosphere of the studio. "Hugh, come on. You're taking this way too seriously. This is just television. It's just entertainment." Those words proved to be the final straw for Hugh. His expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like pity as he stared down at Jimmy. "Just entertainment? Jimmy, there are people in this audience who saved up money to come here tonight. There are people watching at home who look forward to your show as a bright spot in their day. You think they tuned in to watch you try to humiliate your guests? You think that's what they consider entertainment?" Hugh turned toward the audience, addressing them directly for the first time since the confrontation began. "You all came here tonight expecting to have a good time, to maybe hear some interesting stories, to connect with people whose work you enjoy. Instead, you've been forced to sit here and watch this man try to tear me down for reasons I honestly don't understand." The audience was completely captivated, hanging on Hugh's every word. Some were nodding in agreement, while others looked confused and uncomfortable, as if they weren't sure what they were supposed to do or feel in this unprecedented situation. Jimmy, perhaps sensing that he was losing not just the argument but the audience as well, made one final attempt to assert his authority. He stood up from behind his desk, his voice taking on a harsh edge that shocked even his own production crew. "Hugh, I think it's time for you to leave. This is my show, this is my studio, and I won't be spoken to like this." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Hugh actually smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Your studio? Jimmy, this studio belongs to the network, the advertisers, and most importantly, to the audience who makes your career possible. You seem to have forgotten that you're not the star here, you're just the host, and a host's job is to make their guests feel welcome, not to attack them." Hugh began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled. "You want me to leave? Fine. But I want everyone here and everyone watching at home to understand exactly what happened tonight. I came here as your guest, prepared to share my work and connect with the audience, and you decided to turn it into some kind of personal attack for reasons that I still don't understand." Jimmy, clearly panicked by how completely the situation had deteriorated, tried one last desperate gambit. "Hugh, security will escort you out if necessary." Hugh paused in removing his microphone, his eyes meeting Jimmy's with a steady gaze that somehow managed to be both intimidating and deeply disappointed. "Security? Jimmy, I'm leaving on my own. But before I go, I want to say something to your audience, because they deserve better than what they witnessed tonight." He turned back toward the audience, his voice carrying clearly through the silent studio. "You all deserve hosts who respect their guests, who understand that their job is to facilitate interesting conversations, not to score points or try to make themselves look good by tearing others down. You deserve better than what you saw here tonight." Hugh finished removing his microphone and placed it carefully on Jimmy's desk. The gesture was somehow more powerful than if he had thrown it down in anger. It was controlled, dignified, and final. Jimmy, perhaps realizing too late how badly he had misjudged both Hugh and the situation, made one final attempt at damage control. "Hugh, wait! Maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we start over?" Hugh paused at the edge of the stage and looked back at Jimmy one last time. "Jimmy, some things can't be started over. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. You made a choice tonight about what kind of host you wanted to be, and I made a choice about what kind of treatment I'm willing to accept. I hope your audience remembers that they have choices too." With that, Hugh Jackman walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, a shaken host, and a moment of television that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. The camera caught Jimmy standing alone behind his desk, looking smaller somehow than he had at the beginning of the show, as if the confrontation had stripped away some essential part of his television persona. The audience began to murmur among themselves, some applauding Hugh's departure while others sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. It was clear that everyone in that studio knew they had seen something unprecedented, something that would change their perception of both men forever. What started as a routine late-night interview had become something much more significant, a moment where the carefully constructed facade of television politeness had been stripped away to reveal the real personalities underneath. And in that revelation, it had become clear which man had conducted himself with dignity and which had allowed his worst impulses to take control. So what do you think really happened here? Was Hugh justified in his response, or did he overreact to what Jimmy might have intended as harmless ribbing? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shocked Hollywood and revealed the real personalities behind our favorite stars.